All right, good evening, everyone. This is Carlos. This is the Gadfly Multi-Channel Network, and this is actually a public broadcast that we're doing this evening. Very excited for the Gadfly Network and the folks that have recently been subscribing to our network. And tonight, I'm here with Ken Shortgun Jr. of ShotgunEconomics.com, and want to wish everyone a happy St. Patty's Day for those that are celebrating. And Ken, good evening. How are you, sir?
Evening. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. There have been 15 states so far that have set the quarantine of shutting down restaurants, bars, etc. Arizona, not yet. So I went out earlier today and got some, went and shot some pool in my local bar. And I discovered when I got there about 11:15, there was nobody there. So I shot for an hour and a half. I left about 12:45. Nobody came in.
Well,
I was the only individual in that place that's usually pretty crowded at lunchtime, and it was St. Patrick's Day. So, needless to say, on the way home, I stopped by the grocery store, and it's no longer toilet paper that's being ravaged. They are pillaging everything. So, the time of prepping is done. The time of panicking is here.
Well, Ken, we messaged earlier about having a show tonight, and typically I do indulge a little bit on St. Patty, so I do have my Guinness here ready to go. I'm not sure if you can see it all. I got my Guinness.
Sweet.
I was listening to you two earlier today, and then I've got my Proper 12 Irish whiskey ready to go. So.
Oh, you can't beat it. Well, I was trying to think of a theme for a little tonight show. We're going to talk about some of the things that were discussed today. Some of it good, some of it interesting, but that's really our whole motto, is to try to get the information that people need. They may not have the time, they may not have the resources to find. So I want to go ahead and pass that on. What happened today, what is expected from Congress, from the administration, what the Fed is doing. We all want to know what that's doing. But the theme I decided on was I finally discovered who J.G. Wentworth is. So let's go ahead and start right off and do this little theme here.
I have a structured settlement and I need cash now. Call J.G. Wentworth, 877 cash now.
I have an annuity, but I need cash now.
Call J.G. Wentworth, 877 cash now.
Well, let's move on over to
what we've heard from hardworking Americans. Many companies have now shut down, whether it's bars or restaurants. Americans need cash now, and the president wants to get cash now. And I mean,
so we finally discovered who J.G. Wentworth is.
Steve Mnuchin.
Steve Mnuchin.
Oh dear Lord, that's hilarious.
Yeah, when I heard that on the speech today, or the conference, the first thing I started doing was tweeting out that I finally discovered J.G. Wentworth. So now let's take a look at some of the things that that the administration is taking before Congress that they want passed before the end of the week. That's going to affect small businesses, the American people, corporations, etc. A $1.2 trillion package to fund stimulus checks and delay IRS payments. Now, we're going to jump over here real quick. For those who have already set and filed in their taxes and are expecting a refund, the Treasury Department is going to try their best to make sure you get your refund before or on April 15th. That's not going to change. But if you owe a payment, and you owe up to $1 million, which will include some small businesses, pass-throughs, etc., you have 90-day extension. You don't have to do anything special. All you have to do is have filed your taxes. It will automatically not ding you for interest or that you didn't pay. So for those who have to pay, that's a little bit more money they can use now, cash now, and go ahead and avoid having to pay their taxes until, let's see, May, June, July, about July 15th. Now, that can always be extended because we don't know how long it's going to be. One of the more interesting things that really stood out today was Trump finally got serious about the coronavirus. I guess some individuals, maybe it was Fauci or somebody from the CDC, showed him a study, and it got to it. I guess it perhaps terrified him to the point that he said that this is going to at least go through July and August. It's no longer, oh, it's going to be a few weeks, it's going to be quick, we're going to be done with it. No, he mentioned July and August, and that set in motion a number of different things. Now, of course, he'd been trying to do the payroll tax, which is good because not only does it help people, it also helps corporations. That's
Correct.
less money that they have to do. But
It's a shared expense, right? It's a shared cost.
the fact of the matter is, this is how many jobs are expected to be lost as restaurants and bars shut down. 33 million.
Whew.
Well, if they're not working, then what does a payroll tax do? Nothing.
Nothing.
So we're going to expect to have direct payments. And as part of that, we're going to have free testing. New York has already done delays on medical and student loan debt. The president also did from those who have federal debt, student loan debt. That's been delayed, no interest. We're going to have, the estimate is $1,000 a month per household, or perhaps, and there's even bantering between $1,000 and $6,000 per household. The reason that's a difference is because if you're a single filer, you're probably going to get $1,000. If you're a joint filer with dependents, you're probably going to get a little bit more. So we'll have to see how, this is the plan that's being sent to the Senate. The Senate's going to tweak it. It's going to go to the House. The House, it appears that for the most part, bipartisanship is in play. There's a saying from a TV show I remember that says, when a crisis comes, we take our hatchets and we bury them in the backs of our real enemies. Well, we haven't really had a crisis of this magnitude since 9/11. So, will that be enough to see Nancy Pelosi put down the Botox? I don't know. I suspect so, especially as this is an election year. And for once, especially with people being quarantined at home, for once, there is going to be great scrutiny on all the politicians on how they deal with this crisis. So that's what we got looking forward to. One of the more interesting things today, rather than pull up the Dow, which of course loved stimulus, we're going to take a look at oil prices. We dropped another $2 today.
Wow.
And here in overnight Asian trading, we're down another 44 cents. So we've got $26 West Texas Intermediate, and look at Brent crude. Brent crude is about to lose the $30 handle. By the way, there was, we talked about on my market wrap up yesterday, how there was $1.2 trillion put over 2 days for the repo market to try to add liquidity and deal with a lot of what's going on. The interesting thing is where is that money going, and why is it all of a sudden not all the money is being requested? As a matter of fact, of the 500 billion, the second 500 billion that came out yesterday, only 17.8 billion was requested. Well, here's the problem. Remember we talked about the gambit that Vladimir Putin made when he decided that he was going to reject lowering production levels and was prepared for lower oil prices as a means to get it at the U.S. shale oil industry.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Well, what we are seeing right now, and the reason that there is so much money necessary, so much credit being put into that, is because the oil derivatives are all kicking off and defaulting.
Hey,
That's
Ken, real quick,
why they're doing trillions of dollars every single day. It's because of the oil derivatives.
Yeah, Ken, real quick, dial back a little bit in regards to the helicopter, the incoming money. Not only do you have to take a look at the initial expense, but how much tax revenue is going to be completely missed, not only in the municipalities with the sales tax decline, but also just in the taxes collected for Social Security and everything. It's going to be a fairly significant amount of funds that are going to be needed the next several years. The $1 trillion they're going to be pouring out, that's just more of that's not one-time deal. There's going to be a lot more expense associated with it.
Well, there's going to be some interesting things, and we can talk about that, because I'm going to point out something that the Fed is also launching and why that's going to be significant for not just corporations, but also for municipalities. Now, here's the interesting thing when you talk about Social Security. Back when Jack Lew was the Treasury Secretary under Barack Obama, Boehner was the Speaker of the House, and they did a 2-week government shutdown. One of the things that came out in, I think it was probably the Washington Times, New York Times, one of the two. Jack Lew announced that if this shutdown goes on for any extended period of time, they will have to defer or cut Social Security payments. Well, wait a second. The government shutdown did not mean that payroll taxes were not still going to the Treasury. Okay? It's not like now where they're telling businesses to close. No, government shutdown means that they just couldn't extend the debt ceiling. So if they were still getting Social Security taxes and Medicare taxes, why would that not be? Why would they have to make cuts on Social Security payments? Because we've already reached the point of no return with Social Security. And that's what deficit spending is required. They have to borrow money just to make Social Security payments. Well, if they're already borrowing money to make Social Security payments, what's another few $1 trillion over the course of this?
Sure, why not?
And
pretty soon your toilet paper at home is going to be worth more than your dollars in your billfold.
we are finally going to reach that point of seeing some high inflation kick in, because as we've noted so long, when the Fed was doing QE and the expansion, $40 trillion over the past 12 years or more, all the money remained in the financialization part of the economy, i.e. Wall Street. It only barely trickled down into the general economy. Banks like JP Morgan were not lending to small businesses in mass. What they were doing is they were lending for homes, they were lending for cars. That's it. So that it evened out collateral-wise. But for the most part, they weren't lending small businesses or retail, and you saw what happened to much of the retail as commercial property started increasing in price. There's part of your inflation. The healthcare industry, there's your inflation. Education, there's your inflation. And even up to a certain point, things like food and energy did go up. But it was a trickle down. It would be considered a sort of frog in the boiling water type of inflation. Now we've got soon to have high unemployment. And when you have high unemployment, and you have what we now are starting to see at the grocery stores, everybody's going to be home, and they're as soon as they get their checks, they're going to be out spending it at the grocery stores. You're going to start seeing supply and demand create higher prices, and so high inflation is suddenly going to hit into the general economy.
Yeah, it's pretty devastating what's occurring, and a lot of people are looking for clarity through this. The last few days I've had more calls about concern and things going on. So it's very, very alarming, Ken.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what I mentioned before, what is the Fed doing? Okay. The Fed is launching this. Remember how the repo was tied to the Treasury? Now the repo is going to be tied to your stocks. If you own stocks, you can borrow and collateralize it in the repo market. Oh my God! Let's just repo every asset on the planet.
The stocks that probably aren't even owned.
Well, yeah, they are. I mean, investment firms and hedge funds. This is exactly what Boeing should do. Instead of a taxpayer bailout, Boeing should go to the Fed and say, guess what? We bought back $100 billion worth of stock last year to pump up our price. We want to go ahead and use it as collateral and borrow money from the Fed. And the Fed now, we're at 0 to 0.25 at the discount window. It's free money. Now, what I was saying also is the Fed's going to deal with this. The Fed is going to start buying commercial paper. Now, that's a very generic term, but here's what the definition of commercial paper is. Commercial paper is a money market security issued by large corporations to obtain funds to meet short-term debt obligations, for example, payroll, is backed only by the issuing bank or company promise to pay the So commercial paper is going to be the short-term debt, and the Fed's going to buy it. It's the same thing that the ECB was doing, buying sovereign debt, corporate debt, and every kind of debt for the past 6-7 years.
Bingo.
Before they ended up
absolutely.
buying everything. Now, what does this mean for the local economies? Well, the thing with the local economies are because it's not like a contagion where everybody is turning into World War Z. This is more along the lines of, rather than income tax payments and property tax payments, there is going to be a lot of income coming from sales tax. And that sales tax is going to come from the spending from free money from the government. So that's how they're going to help out the municipalities up to a point. Plus the fact that, you know what? We're residents of a state. Why are we relying on the federal government? Why isn't the state taking care of its own people? Well, as I mentioned either yesterday or in my market recap or a couple days ago when we had our little get together on Sunday, the world is saturated with absolutely incompetent leadership at every level. And to sort of exemplify this, let's take a look at, as I mentioned, bipartisanship is pseudo working as these politicians get ready for the election day, but there's still one Fruit Loop of a senator who is trying to politicize the crisis. And that, of course, is Pocahontas.
What did she say now? What did she do?
Pocahontas is laying out 8 conditions for a federal bailout. Companies must maintain their payrolls, i.e. pay people not to work. Companies must automatically boost their minimum wage up to, or their minimum wage to $15. Companies are prohibited from share repurchases. That's fine. Prohibited from paying out dividends or bonuses. That's fine as well. They must set aside at least 1 seat of the board of directors for a worker. Collective bargaining agreements should remain in place and not be renegotiated. Corporations must obtain shareholder and board approval for all political expenditures, and CEOs must be required to personally certify a company is compliant or face criminal penalties. So no layoffs, no buybacks, no bonuses, high minimum wage, and union representation on board. Is any wonder why nobody in the Democratic Party voted for her in the primaries? She is an absolute fruitcake. But let's take a look at, I think last thing we want to take a look at is some good work that Jim Bianco. Now, for those who don't know Jim Bianco delves deep into a lot of what the Fed does. And he was discovering that when the Fed was talking about, we're just doing $35 billion a night of overnight repo, within something like 2 or 3 weeks, he discovered that it was between $250 and $300 billion that they didn't show the transparency for, but if you knew where to look, you could find it. Well, we are now, the Fed, at least in the near future, is going to do 2 sets of repo, $500 billion each a day. We are now doing $1 trillion repos. What was it I said on Sunday? By the end of the year, the American people will have a very strong definition of what the term quadrillion means.
You're right. You're right.
So, what does Jim Bianco say? We're at a real risk of financial markets being closed. Now, people think, of course, as financial markets being the stock markets. But the financial markets, because we are the world reserve currency, means swaps between countries. If countries need dollars, they need the markets to remain open, the Forex markets. This means the corporations being able to get commercial paper to pay their payroll. This means bond markets. This means everything besides just the stock markets. And with the Federal Reserve, what we find out is their tools are not capable of dealing with a system now that is saturated with debt. These same tools that helped us get out of the 2008 global financial crisis, because they have kept these tools going for 12 years, 10 to 12 years. Now, when they try to use them only in greater quantity, they aren't working. This is because I wrote an article back in 2016. The Fed has reached the point of diminishing returns. And at its apex, every dollar that the Fed printed and put into the economy, for every dollar of GDP, it required 14 new dollars of credit. If you're going to print $14 just to get $1 GDP, that's beyond the point of diminishing returns.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So now we are 3 years later, and the Fed has been kicking into the markets since 2018 when it lowered interest rates again, since September when it did the repo, et cetera, ad nauseum. Look how much money they put in just the last 7 days, upwards of $5.5 trillion, and it's done nothing.
Wow.
So they may have no choice but to close the financial markets, or the financial markets will get to a point, that invisible hand, where it forces everything to close on its own.
Yeah. Ken, I wanna ask you, because there's, and not asking you obviously to give financial advice, but there's a lot of talk regarding that. Hey, these are normal times, and these are normal things with the markets, and it's gonna shoot right back up, and everything's gonna be fine and dandy, and we will progress. I'm sticking to my guns that these are not normal times, and the direction that we're going, the path that we are on, are uncharted. That there's no point that we can kind of guesstimate or understand the direction of what's happening right now.
Yeah, for a second I thought I was in an interview with CNBC, saying that everything's fine and it's going to boost right back up and buy stocks. No.
Yeah.
No, the fact of the matter is that the Jim Willies, the London Pauls, myself, the Peter Schiffs, the Michael Pentos, the Greg Manarinos, we've been saying this for more than a decade. We saw the results of what was required to keep the system going when it should have collapsed in 2008. We saw what was being done, and we saw the fact that every time that they stopped QE1, the markets tanked. So they did QE2, the markets tanked. The QE3, the markets tanked, et cetera, and then the repo, and each one has been increasingly bigger. The markets cannot sustain now without the Fed. It is a completely credit-driven system. So, as a time frame, I have no idea. But what I can pretty much guarantee is that it has gone over the cliff. We have crossed the Rubicon. There is no going back.
No.
Mm-mm. The Fed will never be able to the markets will never be able to function without trillions of dollars, and it looks like trillions of dollars per day of intervention through the central bank or the Exchange Stabilization Fund. At a certain point, as I mentioned, then we reach that point of hyperinflation, where hyperinflation is not a monetary event. Hyperinflation is a confidence event. People no longer trust the money.
Yeah.
And the world is already rejecting the money. How long until the American people reject it?
Yeah. I mean, wouldn't this be an opportune time just to close the Fed and restructure the entire landscape of the banking system? Obviously the return of Glass-Steagall, determining the value of gold and resetting. And I didn't get that for myself. That was Greg Manarino's idea, that reestablishing a true gold price, and you're leveraging as reserve, and that we wouldn't have to have everything in there as far as reserve. But why isn't the administration or Trump really utilize, if it's true and Trump's agenda was to shut down the Fed and collapse that, why is this happening?
One, he can't. The Fed is a congressional creation. Congress created Fed. The president can't do it by executive order. Okay. So the problem is that most of the congressmen who are in there are, one, incompetent, or two, they are bought and paid for tools. And we're talking even many of the Republicans. So it's not a matter of just the Democrats are evil, yada, yada, yada. No, most of them across the board. It's kind of interesting that so many Republicans decided to retire in the 2018 election because they knew what was coming.
And CEOs
some of them are
resigning.
look at the CEOs. I mentioned that before. 6,100 resigned or left major corporations last year, with 297 just in January alone, including Disney, IBM, you name it. So with that being said, the insiders know that the system is screwed.
Yeah, it is. And I think
if it wasn't for the coronavirus, then potentially that something might be done. But you're not going to try to take down the financial arm that runs the financial system in the midst of a biological crisis. So, yeah, that would be what would be lovely to do. But if you don't have something ready in place, then you get the escape from New York scenario. Because as I mentioned about the commercial paper, as I mentioned about the oil derivatives, everything is built on paper. And if you suddenly shut off the spigot, local governments collapse, state governments collapse, pensions collapse, Social Security collapse, Medicare collapses, everything. The just-in-time system that we use for truck delivery into to bring our food into the cities is based on credit. It's not based on capital. Most of these companies don't have savings stored up. They have to borrow, and then they pay it back once they get paid for their deliveries.
Bingo.
Everything is
vendors,
credit.
Yeah, absolutely. Vendors that show up at your, Pepsi, all these vendors that show up at these grocery stores, they're not given, a check at that time period or cash out of the register. That's why it may end up being that you're pretty
exactly.
Screwed.
They want their cash now.
Yeah, but Ken, one of the things that I've noticed, and I think that for all Americans that are listening, and obviously take coronavirus serious and do precautions and wash your hands and social distancing, all that kind of good stuff. But keep in mind, they keep moving the goalpost with Corona. They keep changing the timeline that, hey, look, 30, 60, 90 days. And now it's August. And now there's a second wave. People are being diagnosed again a second time with Corona. They're going to leverage this for all they can to, keep people so fixated on this. But what people need to understand is that potentially our way of life here in America has fundamentally changed.
Yeah, it fundamentally changed in 2008. It fundamentally changed in 1987. It fundamentally changed after 9/11. That's the key. And the problem is, as opposed to what you see in France with the yellow vests, what you saw in Hong Kong, the American people as a whole, unless it's like taking away their EBT cards, we really don't get that gumption. The last time the American people stood up en masse to protest for a long period of time over something was in the late 1960s during the Vietnam War. Since then, those same hippies that were protesting became the Gordon Geckos of the 1980s. And, now they're the baby boomers. And they really don't care what happens because they just make sure they got their retirement.
Yeah.
For the most part. I'm not going to label everyone that, but when you live in a gated community, it's because you want to cut yourself off from the rest of the world.
And that's why, again, not to pour salt in the wound and everything. And that's why it's important for people to get their information from valuable resources. I had a family member, call me today, upset because, primarily most of their nest egg is tied to the markets and, what took place. And now they're very torn because they have some friends saying, keep it there. Don't move it. It's going to bounce right back up and do the things, and people need to understand that these are not normal times. There's certain things that need to start taking place, and don't panic. That's not the right thing to do. I'm optimistic that, through this transition period that we can evolve as a society, and hopefully this brings us closer together as a society to help one another through and navigating through this, whether it's, an elderly person that may not have a family member close by to do their shopping, or helping a neighbor. These are the times to leverage the power within the community to support each other. It's just going to be so important, versus fixated on the left right thing. And most times I would argue and say that the Republicans have basically taken over a socialist agenda implementing all these things. But you can't really say that, just because of the fact that there are going to be a lot of people in hurt, a lot of people in need. And I would much rather, if the government's going to institute policies that are going to be, printing money, I'd much rather that go to Main Street to try to help the individual families, versus propping up these investment banks and everything else. The true answer is they do need to default. It's going to be painful. They do need to default, so that we can get to that leverage price, that basement. Well, shoot, heck with the basement. It's blown away. But just interesting times, Ken. There's a lot of people reaching out right now, looking for answers, looking for solutions, and I'm glad that you're here to share the information and provide your insights that you do for our listeners.
Hey, we are a community here at the Gadfly, and I think as more of the mainstream doesn't have the answers for people, then hopefully they're going to be looking for this alternative, just like they did at the start, following the 2008 financial crisis. But as things settled down, recovery, when they're Bernanke and Yellen, people just went back to, things are fixed, things are fine. But unfortunately, and this is just sort of the American psyche. We don't like to watch things or study things for more than 15, 20 minutes. We've got short attention spans. And so really digging in and trying to accept what is really under the surface is difficult. It's totally understandable. And that's why we try to do, a lot of times we have podcasts that go over an hour. I can understand that it'd be difficult for people to have find the time and to listen to it. But a lot of times we do it just 15 to 30 minutes, and hopefully we can get the information out there that is pertinent, with also being able to make it understandable.
Yeah, I think that's important right now, is to make it understandable for, keep it in layman terms so that people, understand it. I'm not going to criticize, Americans, but, for the most part, people don't understand what's truly happening, because we're so fixated on other things, but we've been conditioned that way for so long. It's hard not to make an excuse. But Ken, we've learned nothing. We've learned absolutely nothing from 2008. And I like what the statement that you made, that, regardless of left or right, we do not have the proper leadership established to guide us through this time. There's a lot of other people who are more qualified to do this. And I'm not speaking directly in terms of the president. What I'm talking about is just the entire political landscape of some of the things that we're witnessing at state level are very counterproductive to what's happening. And people need to be aware of that. And as we navigate through this change, just rest assured that, there are platforms like ourselves with the Gadfly multi-channel network, that we have people like Ken, London Paul, Jim Willie, the Holy Trinity that are out there who have been discussing these things for numerous years. And, it's a shame more people weren't paying attention, so they could have got out of harm's way. But at this point now, there's no need of worrying about that. It's now, how do we navigate through this, and how do we persevere? How do we take care of our families? How do we ensure that we're safe within our communities?
Yeah, if more and more people are going to be sequestered at home for a given period of time, then that's when you're going to see the opportunities for neighborhoods to once again come together. Hopefully. I fear in many cases it's gone too far, but in the times of crisis, we also see paradigm shifts. Things change. And the pendulum always goes from left to right to left. We had 40, 50 years of primarily liberal policies. whether in the courts, whether in legislation, whether in the growth of the welfare warfare state. Suddenly, over the past 10 years, we've had to move back to the right. It's going to go to a certain point, and then it's going to start swinging back. With that being said, communities now, people, we need to put down the smartphones. Social distancing is good up to a point. To me, it's just more virtue signaling. Because if you need to help somebody, you're not going to be standing away from them 6 feet, and then trying to help them in their, if they have a problem. You just got to live by faith and say, you know what? I am the type of person that helps others. I'm not the type of person who sit there and criticizes because maybe my neighbor did this or maybe the government did that. In the long run, when push comes to shove, it's either going to be what we saw in Ferguson where they burned the city down, or it's going to be a matter of communities get together after a hurricane and help build each other's homes and provide meals for each other and watch their kids while they have to go to the hospital, or even something small and simple as that.
Yeah, very well said. Very well said. Ken, thank you so much for a great conversation this evening. Again, for people who are listening for the very first time to Ken and to our network, please make sure to check us out. Just go over to, I'll put the link in the description, which already should be there, but our link to our site is called the gadfly.vhx.tv. We have 3 very dynamic contributors there that you can browse their content. So each one of them has their own playlist established. We also do roundtable discussions. We do listener Q&As because our subscribers love that they can participate that way. Just important right now, again, to get your information from valuable resources, and that's what we provide at the Gadfly. You can also follow us over on Twitter. You can jump over to Twitter. A lot of people don't know we have a Twitter platform where we post some of our content, some of our information there, and that's at thegadfly.mcn. And don't forget, please check out Ken's work. Ken has his independent platform at shotguneconomics.com. Ken, any closing thoughts before we wrap this session up?
No, I think we touched upon getting important information out. Look for Congress to finally get off their butts before the end of the week. And hopefully, if everything goes well, we should start seeing cash now within the next 2 to 3 weeks or so.
Yep, absolutely. All right, Ken, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
You too, CJ.